Good evening, and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you are in the know. We are online at commonwealthclub.org, on Facebook, Twitter, and check out our YouTube channel. I'm Diego Rodriguez, a partner at the global design firm IDEO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're here with Kevin Kelly, senior maverick of Wired magazine. Kevin co-founded Wired in 1993 and was its executive editor for its first 7 years. In our conversation this evening, Kevin and I will be exploring his new book, The Inevitable: Understanding the 12 Technological Forces that Will Shape Our Future. Kevin will begin our session with an overview of the book, but before that, let me tell you a little bit more about this remarkable person. Since the 1970s, when Kevin explored the globe as a photojournalist, he's been a leading voice in anticipating, imagining, and decoding how we coexist with new technologies, and vice versa, I might add. A sampling of his notable roles: he was a founding board member of The Well, which pioneered online communities and social networks. He was publisher and editor of the Whole Earth Catalogs and the Whole Earth Review. And he is currently a founding board member of the Long Now Foundation, a group which encourages long-term thinking and is building a clock and a library that will last 10,000 years. And oh, by the way, they run one of my favorite cafes in San Francisco. He writes for a who's who of global publications and is the best-selling author of books such as Cool Tools and What Technology Wants. Please welcome Kevin Kelly to the Commonwealth Club. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for coming out. I want to spend some time this afternoon, evening, talking about where technology is going. And much of what we know about technology is completely unpredictable, but there are certain aspects of it that are predictable. And I want to talk about some of those. I outline these trends as sort of like tilts that are in technology. They lean in certain directions. And if we can understand those leanings, we'd have a kind of a good idea of where things are going. So I have kind of 3 of the 12 leanings I talk about in this book. I want to talk about 3 of them just to give you a really brief sense of where we are. And then, of course, the cool part is to have a conversation afterwards. And so I'm going to try and go through these pretty fast just so we have enough time to have a discussion. The first trend that I want to talk about is something called to cognify, to make something smarter. We don't have a really good word in English for making things smarter. We don't say to smartify or to insmarten or something. So I'm resurrecting this old term of cognification, to cognify something, which means to make it smarter. And that's also kind of what we mean by artificial intelligence. And so that trend is what we're gradually, actually more faster, making things smarter and smarter, making dumb things smarter and smart things even smarter. That trend is actually already happening. We call it artificial intelligence. And the thing about artificial intelligence is that it's already here. It's already happening. We just don't call it that. Your Siri or Google Now, the thing in your phone, would be called artificial intelligence 50 years ago. But now we just call it machine learning. We call it expert systems. We call it other things. So basically, anytime we succeed in making this thing, then we don't call it AI anymore, we call it something else. So it's always receding in that sense. So we'll still be working on AI 50 years from now because it's a constantly moving goalpost. But no matter what we call it, it's already here, and it's mostly in the back room. You don't notice it. It's being used to diagnose X-rays better than humans. It's being used to go through legal evidence better than human paralawyers. It's being used to fly the airplane that you might take to cross the country. The human pilots only fly 7 to 8 minutes for those 5 or 6 hours or even 14 hours. And if you have a modern car, there's a little chip in the wheels that brake better than you do. These ABS brakes are smarter than you are in braking, and that's why we now let them brake for us, because they can do it better than we can. There are 3 technologies that recently made this 50-year-old technology, which has been going on, AI, artificial intelligence, has been going on for 50 years, but going very, very slowly. And suddenly, in the last 3 years, 3 technologies made a perfect storm that enabled this to happen very fast, to progress very fast. Those were neural nets, which were a software. They figured out how to do these at very large scale by stacking them up. They call it deep learning. And then the hardware that runs on, for a long time, cost millions of dollars. And you'd hear about these supercomputers like Watson and IBM that were humongous big things that were multi-million dollars to build. Well, they figured out that the little tiny chips that they use in video games were ideal for doing AI. They're parallel processing, and they became a commodity. So now all the big companies doing AI are running them on these video gaming chips called GPUs, graphical processing units. And the third thing that they found that they needed to do AI in today's world was big data, big training sets. You have to train the AI with a lot of examples. And they were trying to do it with hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. But it turned out that to really do it well, you needed millions of examples. And so the companies that were sitting on big data, like Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook, are now the companies that have an advantage in doing AI because they're sitting on these huge bits of data that they can use to train the AI. So these three things suddenly were made available in the last couple of years, and now that's why we're talking about AI and what it's doing. It's because we have finally enough fuel to make it work. And of course, you recently heard about the AlphaGo, the Google AI that beat the world's best Go master, which is a very complicated thing. It wasn't very mechanical. It actually required some creativity, which the AI did have. And an example of the AI is it can look at those different images and it can actually describe in language what's going on in the image. Okay, in any language, not just English. Okay, so it can see it, says, oh, that's a boy on a bicycle or a motorbike in dirt, whatever it is. It's very, very smart. It can actually understand what's happening in the image. And so Google has also, one of the leading AIs, has taught an AI how to learn how to play a video game. Now, if you've been playing video games, you most likely have been playing against an AI. So the fact that an AI could play a video game was nothing new. But what Google did was it taught it how to learn to play the AI of the game. And so that being able to learn, they showed the game, it just made random choices that learned how to play the game. It wasn't taught how to play it. That artificial learning is really what we're talking about. That was a big, huge step. Okay, and so I think of this as more of like artificial smartness, because the word artificial intelligence has a lot of baggage. We kind of associate, we have some expectations about that are not really very, very useful. It's better to think of this as artificial smartness, which is very narrow in some senses. And so I would say that your calculator is smarter than you are in arithmetic, okay? The GPU, the GPS unit is smarter than you are in spatial navigation. Google or Bing is a search engine is smarter than you are in long-term recall and memory. Okay, so these are very narrow types of intelligence. And the important aspect of them is they're not human-like. The reason why we want to put an AI into a self-driving car is because it is not driving like a human. Right? It's not being distracted. It's not worried about whether it left the stove on. It's not worried about whether it should have majored in finance. It's just going to drive, okay? And it's engineered to drive. And in fact, the fact that it doesn't have a consciousness may actually be a benefit. Maybe we can advertise them as being consciousness-free because they're not being distracted. So we have a basic misunderstanding, even in the popular culture and even to some extent in the AI community, of our own intelligence. We tend to think of our own intelligence or intelligence in general as being a single dimension. It's kind of like a long line that's like decibels. It gets louder and louder. And at the beginning, you may have the smartness of a mouse, and then there's sort of a chimpanzee, and then maybe there's somebody who's really dumb, and then there's an average person like me, and then there's a genius. And so this is getting louder, IQ is increasing, but that is totally wrong. That's not what intelligence is really about. It's a much more complicated thing that resembles more a symphony of different notes. And each of these notes is played on a different cognitive instrument. And those instruments can vary in their loudness, and some may be really loud and some may be quiet, and they vary. That mixture varies by person. And those all different kinds of thinking. So there's deductive reasoning, there's spatial reasoning, there's emotional intelligence. So our own minds are made up of a very huge collection, an ecosystem of all different kinds of thinkings. And they vary by person. And then if we go into the animal kingdom, they will vary there. They may have a smaller set, and they may actually, animals may be superior. They may have certain instruments that are superior to ours in certain notes and certain types of thinking. Like a squirrel has a longer long-term memory than we do because it's got to remember where to put the nuts. And then when we make an AI, a machine language version, we're going to engineer them likewise, where some of those notes, some of those types of thinking will be superior to ours, and most of them won't, because we're engineering them for very different reasons. Okay, and so the picture you want to get in your mind is, as we're making AIs, we'll make millions of different species of thinking, different types of minds, all of them very different from human, and all of them specialized in something or other that we want done, because we want to use these to solve problems that we ourselves cannot solve. There may be some problems in business and science that are so difficult to figure out that our own human intelligence may not be sufficient, and we may need to make a two-step process where we invent these other kind of mind that can then help us solve the problem. So what we get out of this is we're getting it think different, a different way of thinking. That's the main virtue. The second thing we get out of this thinking different is that it's actually going to propel and make a second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution happened 100 plus years ago when we invented what I would call artificial power, artificial energy. So instead of having to make everything with our human muscles and animal muscles, we could turn a switch and we can employ this artificial power that could actually run a steam engine, run a locomotive, run a train, run a car. And then we could also distribute this power on a grid to all homes and all factories and all farmsteads, and people could just buy power by plugging it in and use that artificial power to do things way beyond what their own muscles could do. And with that advantage, we built cities. We built this entire city with all artificial power. We made railways, highways, factories churning out endless rows of chairs or refrigerators with this artificial power. Okay, so that was what the thing is. We distribute it in this grid. And anybody could not only purchase it, but it was a center of innovation, because if you were a farmer and you had an idea like, well, I could take a manual water pump and then I could add electricity and I could have an electric pump. That was a brilliant invention. And you multiply that by thousands of times, millions of times, and that was the Industrial Revolution, this amazing moment where we could kind of leap forward by building all this stuff because we have to rely on our own muscles. So when you drive down a highway in your car with a really flick of a switch, you harness equivalent of 250 horses. Okay, that's amazing. That's the kind of power we have. Well, we're going to do something very similar now, where we're going to take all those electric things that we have electrified, and now we're going to add AI to them. We're going to cognify them, and we're going to make smart pumps, and we're going to multiply that by 1,000,000 times, and that's going to be this second industrial revolution, where in addition to the 250 horses that you have in your car going down the road, now you have 250 minds. So that 250 minds plus the 250 horses is the self-driving car. That's the self-driving car. And we're going to multiply that again by hundreds, if not thousands of times, because we're going to deliver this intelligence, this IQ, this AI, like electricity was on the grid, on the cloud. You can buy as much AI as you want. You just get it off the cloud. You get it on your computer. You get it wherever you want it, just like you buy electricity. You don't have to make it yourself. You're just going to purchase it. It's become a commodity, a utility, just like electricity and artificial power was in the Industrial Revolution. And so the question that you'll ask is, well, what could you do if you had 1,000 minds working for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for very little? Those artificial minds. They're not human minds, but there are other kinds of minds. They could be doing all kinds of things. And so that's going to be what I suggest the formula for the next 10,000 startups, which is take something and add AI. Take something, take the water pump, add AI. Take something that seems crazy, like take a taxi cab, add AI. What do you get? Uber. It's taxis plus AI. So we're going to do that again and again and again. That's going to be basically the model. And oh, by the way, this is another AI that can actually tell what, you can ask the questions. You can query, you can have a conversation. Say, what color is the girl's skirt? What does she have in her hand? What color is the ball? And it'll give you answers. You can buy that AI right now. And any of you can just log on and you can purchase that for 6 cents, 100 hits. That's today. So it's already here. It's already a commodity. It's already for sale. This has already started. If you take AI and put it into a body, what you get is a robot. And that's the Tesla robots that are making the Tesla cars. They're pretty dumb, and they're actually very dangerous. That's why they have cages on them. If you got near one, they would kill you. But you can make them much more aware of people around them. They can see, you can see where they're looking. They won't hurt you. And the important things about these kind of robots is that you actually program them by showing them what you want done. So they're watching you. You don't need to have a degree in programming. You don't need to be an engineer. You don't even need to be literate. You just need to be able to show them what you want done. And they can actually learn by trial and error and get better and better. And so that's today. That's what it is. And these robots, of course, they can work in garages and alongside of people. And that's very important because, as you'll see, I believe that where we're going to go is that we're going to be working with the AIs and robots rather than against them. The most common occupation in America is actually truck driver. And there's almost 3 million truck drivers. And in 20 years, there are a lot of those jobs will go away. So there's definitely a sense in which robots are going to alter our jobs. But what we don't realize is the number of new things that they're going to make. I would guess at least 50% of the people here would have a job that their grandfather would not have understood what it is that you do. Okay? Like when we took the pink slips to the 70% of Americans who were farmers 150 years ago and told them they would lose their jobs, they would say, well, what would you be doing? And we would say web designer, mortgage broker, yoga teacher. They just would not have understood what it is that we're doing because those jobs are all, not all of them, but a lot of them are made possible by the new things that we make through technology. So where we're going is that we're going to keep inventing new things that we want to make, new things we want to do. And the jobs, wherever they can be specified in terms of efficiency, whether that's a manual labor or knowledge work, if you have a task that can be defined in terms of efficiency, that's a task that goes to the bots. Productivity is for robots. What we are going to gravitate to as humans are the kinds of jobs where efficiency is not as critical or even not desired. And so if you think of science, science is essentially, by definition, inefficient because you're making a lot of failures. You're doing trials. You're not trying to do the same thing you know how to do. In the same way, innovation is, by definition, terribly inefficient because you're going down dead ends. Exploration is inefficient because you're going the wrong way. You're trying stuff. Human relationships are inherently, fundamentally inefficient. Art is inefficient. All these things that we like to do are the things that we're going to gravitate to, these exploring, trying stuff, what if. Whereas anything that can be specified in terms of efficiency that we know how to do goes to the bots. So I think we're actually going to be paid by how well we work with the AIs and the robots because they're going to work alongside of us. When Garry Kasparov, the world's chess master, lost to Deep Blue, when he was beaten by Deep Blue, the big IBM supercomputer, he realized that he could have won if he had had access to the same database of every single chess move that had ever been happened that Deep Blue did, that beat him. So he started a whole new chess league where you could play in this chess league either as an AI or human or as an AI human team. And for the last 5 years, The best chess player on this planet is not an AI. It's not a human. It's an AI plus human team. They call those centaurs in the chess world. And the best medical diagnostician is not a supercomputer AI, and it's not a doctor, it's the doctor plus a supercomputer AI. So as I said, they think differently, and so we are going to work with them. We're going to work with the robots, we're going to work with the AIs, because that's sort of where we're going. It's really working with them rather than against them. The second long-term trend I want to kind of very quickly go through is virtual reality interaction, and you know about it as VR, virtual reality. And I have to say that I was totally wrong about this before. This is me on the right in 1989. The other guy is on the left is the guy who invented VR, Jaron Lanier, and we were trying on his goggles and glove in 1989, and it was really pretty good. I really felt like this is amazing, and this is going to take over the world in 5 years. So I was wrong about the timing. And the reason is because while that was pretty good, the problem was that equipment in today's dollars cost $1 million to do. And so it was just too expensive. What's happened since then is this, smartphone technology. So the smartphone became a commodity, it became very cheap, and it had 3 little bits in there that could be used by the virtual reality, including the tracking of your phone, which they can translate to track your head, and the screens that you look at are actually the phone screens, and the processor is for doing the videos is very tiny and lightweight, so you can put it into a pair of goggles. So that's what's happened, and I think these are going to be, this VR stuff, not in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, but certainly in 20 to 30 years will become a very big ecosystem and places where we spend a lot of time. And there are 2 kinds right now. There's the immersive kind where you put on a pair of goggles and they're dark and you're inside another world. And believe me, you really do feel like you're in a different place. It really does work. The other one is where you have a pair of spectacles that are clear and you can look around and and you see this room, but there's virtual things, maybe a virtual object or virtual people inside the room in your office or your home. And that's called mixed reality, MR. So one's VR, virtual, you're inside, you're immersed. The other one is your MR, you mix, and you feel a presence. You feel as if this thing is really here, even though it's just an image. And the thing about it is, I want to emphasize, is that it's something you feel rather than you know. There's something about how this works on your eyes. It's not working at the front of your brain, it's working much deeper. And a very common trick that they play is you'll be in a virtual world and you'll be standing, and then suddenly they will drop away the floor and you'll be standing right on a cliff. And you know in your mind that you're in a room, but your body is terrified because you're seeing this and you're feeling it in a different part of your brain. And that is actually one of the key elements of why this is important, because in VR, you feel things rather than know them. When you leave, you remember it not as something you saw, but something you felt. So the mixed reality is the leader's Magic Leap, and they have this is a little thing, a little demo they show hiding under the desk. And I have to say again that when I tried it on and I've examined it and I wrote about it, and it really does feel as if that thing is really there. You know it's not, but you feel that it is. And the mixed reality could be useful at work. You could have objects that you can move around. It's very strong in terms of learning because you're using your hands. It's your whole body, not just your mind. And then the idea that Microsoft and others has is that you have these virtual screens, as many and big as you wanted. And they're actually very good. They're easy to read. You can manipulate and use your hands. And so this could be the virtual office. And then you could have the mixed reality that we all know about right now, where it's not just the virtual world or the real world. There's this combination where it's mixed in. That's the whole idea of mixed reality. You're putting these things inside everyday life. There's 2 kinds right now. There's the cheap version where you just swivel around, and then there's the roaming where you need a whole room. And to do that, you need a lot of technology. It's much more expensive. It'll be a longer time in coming, but that's the kind everybody kind of imagines. I think what we get out of this is a movement from the internet of knowledge and information to an internet of experiences. And experiences become the currency. And that experience is also something that's driven by the fact that we can feel. A lot of what we believe about it being real is not just from our eyes, it's also from what we hear and what we use our hands and can feel. So you often get gloves where you hold things because that amplifies that sense of presence and of an experience. I won't even talk about this, but there's a way to cheat and tell, so you can have a small room and you could be walking around and you think that you're walking in a long straight line, miles and miles, but you're actually walking in circles because they're fooling you with what you see. So there's lots of tricks that you can use to give you a sense of being in a different place. And the most popular one is this idea of telepresence. And again, I saw the many demos, and they really do feel as if there's another person right here talking to you. And that is something that many people will pay a lot of money for. So the important thing is that don't have this idea that this is people sitting in the basement by themselves, because all these worlds that I tried out were much more powerful. The most interesting aspects of them were not objects, but other people. These worlds will have other people in them, and they will become, in some ways, probably the most social of all our social media, because we'll be sharing experiences, we'll be sharing things, and there'll be people in them, and that's where we're going to be going there. So the last thing I want to just talk about is the world I was describing, virtual reality world. In order to do that, they have to capture all your emotions, all your face expressions, so you can make your avatar in the world do the same that you're doing back in your bedroom, say. That means that VR is going to be one of the most tracked places on the planet. You'll be tracked in some ways much more than you will be tracked in real life. So if the phone is a surveillance device that you pay for yourself and carry around voluntarily, then the VRs will become totally surveilled worlds that you enter in and pay for. Okay, so just so you know that we're headed into a world where anything that can be tracked will be tracked. And I was involved with starting the quantified self movement, where we did self-tracking to track your health and your body, and the Apple Watch is a good example of that. Scanadu tricorder is this thing that can actually get like 6 or 7 EKG, your brain waves, your heart pressure, blood pressure, heart rate, all these kinds of things, just by touching your temple. So there's non-invasive. It's kind of like the Star Trek tricorder. The whole idea is that you very soon will be able to track on all aspects of your life, kind of without having to think about it, very cheaply and easily. And you could accumulate over time a life chart, a life log of all your particulars and your medical particulars, which turns out that your normal is not my normal. So you would know your normal, because you'd have your whole life tracking, not just once a year you go to the doctors, you have your blood pressure tracked all the time. And it changes during the day, it changes during the week, it changes during the seasons, it changes during your life. You would have a record of that would be able to be used and shared in appropriately in ways in which you could actually make personalized medicine. That is the dream, is to use this kind of tracking so that you could actually get a pill, maybe it's 1 pill a day, that would change depending on the readings of all your information the day before. Okay, so it's an adaptive thing. It's actually reading. You take some medicine, and it immediately reads it, and then it reconfigures and reformulates what you get the next day. That's sort of the kinds of things that we're talking about through this tracking. And of course, it's not just us tracking ourselves. It's other people tracking us. There's our friends are tracking us, tagging us on the Facebook. We have worldwide tweets going around. There's kind of like nerves going around the entire planet as we are being tracked. And I think anything that can be measured is going to be measured. It's going to be tracked. And so the one thing I want to say about that is that I think can be very overwhelming for us. If we imagine everything we're doing being tracked more and more and more, the question is, how can that be comfortable? And I think it can't be. I think being tracked and more tracking is inevitable. What's not inevitable is what we do about it or how we express it. And I suggest one attitude is to take something I call covalence, which means that instead of people watching us, we don't know who they are, what they know, what they do with the information, we can't correct it, we get no benefit. We want to have a symmetry, a two-way relationship so that we watch the watchers. And we know what they do with the information. We can control it, we can hold them accountable, and we get some benefit. If it's symmetrical, like there was, say, in a small town, then we feel more comfortable with that kind of tracking because it's going both ways. It's covalence. So yes, the cops should film everything, but we should film the cops, and we should have access to that film. So that's the kind of covalence that we're talking about. That makes it a little bit easier to understand how we could have more and more tracking and yet have it civilized. And the second thing I would say about this, and this is the last point I want to make, is that there is a coupling between privacy and transparency and the personal. So I talked about tracking to make things personal. I want companies, my friends, to treat me as an individual. But in order to do that, I have to reveal something about myself to them, to my friends, and to a company if I want to be personalized. If I choose instead, and I think there should be a choice, to be hidden or opaque, then I'm going to be treated in a generic way because I'm just a number. So those two are coupled. So if I want to have maximum personalization, then I have to be kind of maximally transparent. If I accept or choose to have maximal privacy, then I have to be treated in a generic way. And so those two are always linked. And so we should have the choice. And what we discovered is that when we have that choice, when we give people that choice with technology to move that slider to either maximum personalization and transparency or maximize privacy and generic treatment, the surprise has been that people keep pushing it to that side. And so the way I would say it is that vanity trumps privacy. Okay? That's who knew. So anything that can be tracked will be tracked. I think the future is actually oftentimes very, very difficult to believe that, in fact, if I had told you about what was coming 30 years ago, it'd be very, very hard to believe. In fact, we talked about these big, huge computers 30 years ago becoming so small that you put them into everything. You put them into chairs, you put them in shoes, you put them into a door. And people laughed. They said it was ridiculous. Why would you ever put a computer into a door? Well, if you stay in a hotel today, there's a computer in the door. That was an impossible thing that became true. There's so many impossible things that I think we actually have to believe in the impossible more often. And if I was to, I think the changes that are coming are just going to be greater than the last 50 years and the next 50 years, and that we're just really at the very beginning of this. We're just at this very, very start of what's happening, and people will look back to this year and say, oh my gosh, I wish I was living in 2016, because you were right at the cusp of this amazing time when you could take X and add AI. You could do all these things, and there's no experts in AI right now. There's no experts in virtual reality. There's no experts in covalence compared to where we'll be in 30 years. We're just really at the beginning. And if you think about, say, in the year 2036 even, just 20 years from now, and they look back now, what we'll realize is that that we haven't really had anything happen yet in AI or VR, that we're just really at the beginning. And that in some senses that the greatest products of the next 20 years have not been invented yet. The thing that they will be talking about does not exist today, which means that you are not late. So thank you. Okay.
All right. And in terms of encouraging vanity over privacy, I would definitely encourage you to submit questions. I've already gotten a bunch, which we will attempt to weave into our narrative here. So Kevin, I got to say the grammar geek in me loves this book because it's built around 12 present participles.
Very good. Not verbs, the present participles.
Yeah, exactly. So I would like to start actually at the end of your book, which is titled Beginning, not the beginning, but beginning, a continuous action verb. And just to amplify it a bit more of what you were just talking about, I got a sense that it goes beyond just this being day zero, but really you're talking that there's a new mind that we've created. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, there are 12, they look like verbs, 12 chapters with verbs with INGs in them. And the last chapter is called Beginning. And the point of that chapter is that while I was telling you how we really feel like we're at the beginning of all these changes, there's another thing that's also happening at the same time that I think is almost as important, and that is that we are weaving together ourselves, 7-8 billion people. We're connecting all together. There's these estimates about, I don't know, maybe the year 2035 about, when every adult on the planet will have a device that will be connected together. So we are connecting all of us together as entire planet, and all the machines and all the devices that we have together, and that not in a metaphorical way, but in an absolute real way, this forms a very large machine. If you can imagine, so every one of us or every phone is a transistor in the bigger computer or a neuron in the bigger brain. And so this becomes a real thing that we haven't seen on the planet before, when you can have several billion people doing something together in real time. So there's 1.5 billion people on Facebook, and while they're just sharing photos and gossip, they're still collaborating together on something, and the tool could be used to make even bigger and more important things. And that beginning, so we are at the beginning of making this very large thing that we don't have a name for. I call it the holos because it's everything. And that holos, that thing, is going to become more important, and we'll figure out what it is and how it works. But right now, we're just at the birth of it, and so that's why I call it the beginning.
It's the sense of the ability to have total recall of anything that's ever been produced and to have a perfect search across it. It almost makes us a new type of human, or at least a new kind of humanity that we're going to experience.
Yeah, I think that becomes part of it. Is that like with Google, as people, I'm sure most people here, I forget how to spell things. I just Google each time I try to spell. I ask it for things I think I should know. So it's actually forming our memory. And in that sense, I think we will depend on it for more and more in terms of being able to recall things. If you have all the books in the world and all the songs and all the magazines and all the newspapers, and they're all digitized, then you have this universal library that everybody has access to. So there is a sense in which our culture is moving into this thing. And so I think there's lots of ramifications about how we understand ourselves. So you were saying maybe it's a new human. Well, I think that's one way to think about it, and that is that we are changing ourselves, and that we are in the process of figuring out what it is that we want to do. So I think each time an AI does something, each time we have genetic engineering, it causes us to say, well, maybe humans aren't what we thought they were. Maybe there's something different. Maybe they aren't the best chess players in the world. We thought they were, now they're not. So we redefine ourselves. So we're in this process of constantly redefining what a human is. And that's going to be part of it, which is, as we make this other thing, we're also going to, besides the AI and genetic engineering, we also have this other big thing that's going to force us to constantly ask ourselves, what is it that humans are? What do we want humans to be? What are humans good for? And what have humans been? So I think we're going to go into like a 100-year identity crisis. For the next 100 years, we'll be asking this question every year.
So you're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California program. We're speaking with Kevin Kelly, senior maverick of Wired Magazine and author of The Inevitable: Understanding the 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future. I'm Diego Rodriguez, partner at the global design firm IDEO, and your moderator. You can listen to Commonwealth Club programs via radio or podcasts. watch our YouTube channel, peruse our website, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. So Kevin, one of the things I love about this book is actually all these 12 areas overlap, right? They're not meant to sit just by themselves. So I saw a natural overlap between beginning and sharing. And one of the things that I found most interesting about your chapter on sharing is this premise you put out that we may be evolving to not quite a political party or a political system, but something that gets the best of Wikipedia and mixes it with Sweden.
Right.
You call that digital socialism. Could you say a bit more about what digital socialism is and what it can do?
Right. So there's been a 30-year-long drift away from things that were been very solid and physical and nouns and tangible and products to things that are intangible and flowing and verbs and processes and services. So we move from product to services, from nouns to verbs, and we're moving into this area where everything is kind of fluid and much more fluid, and that enables things to flow and to be decentralized. And so there is a sense, and also that we can do things in this fluid state collaboratively, decentralized, and sort of like they flow, and then we have these new tools of communication which allow us to collaborate in ways that we have never been able to collaborate before. So we have these very large collaborations. We have things like Wikipedia, where you have tools that allow a girl in Jakarta to contribute to the entry on George Washington. It seems crazy, but that's the power that we have, this collaboration. So a lot of the impossible things we talk about, like Wikipedia or the Facebook, are happening because they're being propelled by the fact that we have collaboration and cooperation at scales and speeds that were never before possible. So the impossible things are these things that we could not imagine having made or do, because we never had those tools that would allow 1 billion people to do something together in real time. That was simply not possible before. So now all the impossible things have this component of this very large scale social collaboration. So I use the word socialism because there's no untainted words. Collectivism, cooperation, these are all words that are tainted by the American politics. They're not so tainted in the rest of the world. When you talk about digital socialism, they know what it means. But in America, we have a lot of baggage around the word socialism, but that's actually technically the best word to talk about this mutualism, this ability for us, like social media, to collaborate in many, many ways. And that's the whole point, is that there used to be a trade-off between, you could not have the power of the group increase. There's a trade-off between the power of the group and the power of the individual, and people saw it as a trade-off. What we're discovering is actually these tools can empower both, can make both the group more powerful and the individual more powerful. And that's been the surprise, is that we can have this digital socialism because it's actually making the group more powerful and the individuals more powerful at the same time. And so that's the sort of the state that we're going. It's not an ideology, it's more of a design criteria.
Let's talk more about this dialectic between the individual and the group, and bringing in some current events from the past week. In another section of the book about screening, which is the power of these screens that we all look at, you made the following statement: people of the screen make their own content and construct their own truth. And I was just wondering how you thought that idea ties in with this idea of sharing and maybe doing impossible things with the failed coup in Turkey and what you saw happening there.
So the larger form of it is that our culture in the West especially has been centered around the book. We've been people of the book. And so the center of the book was text. And so we've had the Constitution, the Bible, books of law. All these things were very text-oriented. And out of that sense of the center of the gravity of the culture being these texts, we also had authors and the same root of authority. So we went to authorities to decide what was true or not. And so that was how you went to the page. You went to the precision and the indelible ink on the page, and that's where truth was. You went to that fixity, that stable, impermanent, monumental book, or books, or library. And now we've moved to becoming people of the screen. And the people on the screen, they have these screens, and everything is flittering across the glass. It's never ending. It's always in the process. It's never done. It's liquid. It's very relativistic. For every expert, there's a counter expert. For every fact, there's an anti-fact. There's a sense in which you cannot have authorities or experts, and so therefore you have to assemble the truth in a different way. And so that's the screen. The screen has a different culture. And I think, going back to the Turkey thing, it's to me, it's part of the illustration was the fact that the newspapers, it wasn't the newspapers that were carrying the news or declaring the situation. It was this liquid medium in which it was very, very hard to tell what to believe. It was a very hard act of trying to discern factual from rumor, one argument from another. So what we have to do is you have to have a network. Each idea or fact is a network that's connected to other ideas that have to be supporting it. And so it becomes a much more difficult task. And I think we saw that in the kind of the chaos and that's still going on right now, because there's no way to look at a piece of paper or even a statement and say, well, this is true and this wasn't.
And another big theme of your book is the idea of decentralization.
Right.
Right? And I think we had this moment, a very meta moment of a camera looking at a screen, looking at a broadcaster,
Right.
looking at her screen with the president of a nation calling on FaceTime.
Right.
So
there's people on the screen. So it's all the screens and, yeah, right. So you have this nested the recursive loop where something is true because A says it, and A is true because B says it, and B says it because C, and it's a loop. And so that's where we are. That's the state that we have to accept. And that's, I think there'll be more of that is all I would like to say about that.
yeah, these experiences are going to keep piling up.
Right.
And you go into great depth in the book about talking about perhaps the only thing that will actually have long-term value are human experiences. Everything else is trending towards zero
Right.
because of a bunch of things.
Everything
we
we manufacture in the world is over the history of, say, decades and if not centuries, is on a long-term trend towards zero. Cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It doesn't matter what it is, except for one set of things, and those are human experiences. So everything else is going cheap, but like concert tickets keep going up. Travel to remote destinations, a high-end chef experience. All these things are experiences, and those are the things that sort of are only going up in cost because of our limited human attention and because of the value we have. Whereas the manufactured things become commodities and they go to zero. So there's a shift to us, and hopefully we'll value those in terms of paying more money because that's where the jobs will be too.
So your comment just now about high-end chef experiences, there's a restaurant in Copenhagen. It's actually more of an R&D lab that serves food called Noma.
Right.
And it's the kind of place, over $300 a plate. You have to try and get a reservation 3 months in advance. Tens of thousands of people apply for 100 spots. Rene Redzepi, who leads Noma, tweeted out last week, 4 days ago, that he observed over lunch, $300 a plate, that 6 people played Pokemon Go throughout the entire meal. At first I thought, I recoiled in horror, but then I thought, they're making a statement about some themes that come up in your book.
Yeah,
First of all, they're
exactly.
clearly people of the screen, but you talk about how when we put so many things in the cloud, we're actually kind of putting our soul there,
Yeah.
and then these bricks of glass and aluminum that we hold in our hands actually become something we don't really want to turn off or give away because it's our soul in the palm of our hand.
Yeah, I think in 50 years now, we'll walk outside, and I think this city will look pretty much as it does right now, because this is the result of the Industrial Revolution, which rearranged the atoms. I think when we walk out of this building in 50 years from now, we'll have a very different idea of who we are. I think the revolution is much more in the intangible in terms of our identity, our place in the world, understanding who we are, what we're doing, why we're here. Those are the things that we're going to be messing with and kind of turning over and overturning in the next 20 to 30 years. Not the physical world. I think most of the physical world, by and large, has already been built and will remain approximately how it is. We'll have auto-driven cars and they'll change parking to a great extent, but the real change that we're headed into is the area that you're talking about, the intangible, the meaning of life, what it is that we see ourselves in our own identity.
What do you think about things like Pokemon Go, just in terms of how fast things are coming? Is it a one-off, or is it something equivalent to like the Benz patent wagon or the Model T? Is it the first of
many?
I
think it's the first of many. I think it's been shown that there's an appetite for it. And I think this idea that we want to understand that there's not two separate worlds. It's not the digital world, which is just bits, and then there's a physical world, which is just atoms. It's the great thing that we're doing is we're taking the digital and embedding it into the physical. So that's where everything will have a chip. And those chips will be visible with our glasses or in some other way. We'll be able to see that. We'll be able to interact with it. But there will be this convergence, this marriage of the two worlds, so that they're really not separate. They're going to be one thing.
So when physical meets digital, you have to think about the human body, and you touched on it in talking about tracking. In the sense of personalized health and other things.
Right.
But there's a lovely part of your book where you're actually talking about Udo Wachter, a gentleman who actually created new sensory perception abilities for the human body.
Yeah, so this is a little hacker guy at Noisebridge in Basin City, and what he took was he took your basic, he took a belt, and he took there's something called a digital compass. The digital compass will point north, and he took that digital on a little screen, sometimes like on your phone. He took that same apparatus and put it inside a belt with piezoelectric, the vibrators you have in your phone. So the idea was that whatever part of the belt was facing north would vibrate. Okay, so we like vibrating here. So as it turned, let's say that was north, it would turn, it would always vibrate here. And so he found that, of course, he could just point to north, but that within almost a week of wearing the belt, he not only could just know where north was without even thinking about it, he also helped him have a map. He got this kind of intuitive sense of where he was. So it became like an extra sense to him, and that was just by quantifying this apparatus. So he's sort of like augmenting himself with another sense of knowing where north was, knowing directions, and knowing how to map around. And so I'm interested if there's any questions from the audience.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we've gotten some great ones, which I want to get to in a minute about malevolent AI.
Because we have just
Yeah, absolutely.
So are there any questions?
Yeah, so I've gotten them transposed over here.
Okay, I know everybody was kind of really.
There's a whole ton.
Yeah, let's get to some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I was transposing them while you were speaking. So one of the questions that's come up a few times, I've had like 5 or 6, have to do with the singularity,
right,
and whether it's hard or soft.
Okay,
and specifically, what do we have to fear about the rise of a malevolent AI?
Right. So I'm sure there's a lot of questions on that, because it is a common concern that is, I think, mostly suggested by Hollywood movies, because it makes a really great movie.
Yeah.
And I think that the likelihood is very, very small. It's greater than 0. But it's not much greater than 0, and that while it is something that we might in the long term want to be concerned about, it's nothing we should be afraid of, because I think the likelihood of it is very, very low. And the reasons are complicated, but they have to do with the fact that, as I described earlier, most of the AIs we're making don't think like us. So the idea of one of them becoming smarter than human is almost by definition not a good way to think about it, because, as I said, already the things are smarter than human, just in different dimensions. And so we have a wrong idea that we have something called a general purpose mind. It's not general purpose. Our minds have been evolved in a very specialized ways for millions of years to survive on this planet, and that once we start to make a million different other kind of artificial minds, we'll see that our own type of thinking is way out in the corner. It's a very particular, specific kind of thinking that we do, and that the idea of like making something smarter than humans is by definition not a correct way to think about it, because they will be smarter than us in some dimensions, but less than us in others, because when you engineer anything, and you should know, you cannot maximize everything at once. You always have the engineering trade-off. And so in other words, smarter than humans, which is what this thing is that they're somehow doing what we do, but better is not a good way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Another question that's come up is, what are your thoughts in terms of this, I guess, relatively near transition, if truck driving is the most
right.
popular activity in terms of making a living, what happens to the truck drivers?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, and I think that there will be some large number of specific jobs that are lost. But there's also, if you think about the fact that there will be 5 million auto-driven trucks driving, they all need to be repaired. They all need to be serviced. They all need to be trained and primed. I mean, there's this huge world of all kinds of new things that we didn't need done before that we will then need to be doing. And some of those will be physical jobs, and some of those will be knowledge jobs, and some will be combinations of it. And so I think we will need training, and I think that's something we know how to do. The military, the U.S. is incredibly, they know how to train people like nothing else. They do a great job. We know how to do all this stuff. We know how to retrain people. We do it all the time. Corporations have great training programs. Companies, we know how to do this. So this can be done. It's a matter of whether we want to have the political will to do it.
Right. Okay, one more audience question. Do you think we'll ever have no privacy? Or is it just a matter that we need to reframe what privacy actually
means? I think privacy is another one of those words that right now is a bundle of different terms, a bundle of different ideas that mean lots of different things. I think we'll tease that apart. Because a lot of time, there's different, it's a continuum, it's not binary, let me put it that way. We have the tendency what's like, you're private or you're not, you have privacy or you don't, but there's first of all a continuum, and there's many different dimensions to it, just like in intelligence. And so we have, something can be in confidence, something can be whispered, something can be hard to find. You can be anonymous, you can be pseudonymous. There's many different ways that we can actually cut this. And I think right now we lump everything together and say privacy. And so it's kind of like, what does that even mean? Do you mean that nobody knows you? In that sense, the only person who had true privacy was like the Unabomber living up in a shack in Montana where he had no contact with anybody. Does it mean that some people know a lot about you, but most people don't? I mean, so there's, I think it's a word that we haven't yet made explicit enough to know to use it in a way that's helpful.
So another great question from the group here is asking about AIs and whether they'll ever be able to be emotionally human.
Oh yeah. So actually, emotion is one of the easiest things to program, and emotions will come along before some of the other elements that we have. It's actually not that difficult to program an emotion into artificial things. Because if you think about it, there are a lot of animals who have emotion, right? I mean, pets have emotions. So we know you don't have to have consciousness to have emotion. Emotions can if you're sensitive to an animal, people understand that birds can have emotions, parrots and stuff. And so we know that you can have emotions in very simpler minds. And so that's actually going to be programmed into the AIs and robots pretty early, long before many other things will be. And that's actually something that doll makers and other people are very interested in, because we'll have things that will really trigger emotion in us and love, and in the way that a ragdoll can have a young girl could kind of fall in love with a ragdoll. And if you imagine that ragdoll talking back and having emotions, it can be very, very powerful. And that will be a challenge for some people too. So I think that's going to come very, very quickly.
In the book, you actually have a really nice list of 26 possible new types of minds.
Right.
It's not exhaustive, but one of them you called a symbiont, which is
Right.
half animal, half machine.
Yeah.
What do you envision that might be doing for us?
I was just trying to list all the ways. I mean, again, if you ask some AI researchers like this idea of the smarter than human to describe what a smarter than human intelligence is like, the only thing they can say, well, it's just like human but faster. And I'm saying, well, there's actually many other ways to imagine alternative intelligences. You could have an intelligence that was conscious but did not have emotions. You could have something that was a bunch of minds together, but they weren't aware that they were together. You could have a mind that was very, very slow and had very little memory, but took a long time to operate. And you could imagine animal minds as also being a model for different kinds of thinking. Right now, we actually don't know minds very well. To me, one of the chief benefits of artificial intelligence is that it's going to be like a microscope for us to understand our own minds. We're rightly prohibited from experimenting on ourselves in our minds. We don't want to have human experimentations. So the way we're going to actually figure out how our minds work is by trying to make as many of them in many different ways as possible, and also animal minds, making them artificially. And so that's how we're going to figure out what it is, and we'll discover that animal minds are far more varied, they're far more powerful in many dimensions than we suspect right now. And part of that process is we'll have a better understanding of what that means even to think like an animal because of AI.
So we've had a few questions about technological determinism, cultural determinism, where
Right.
you sit on the spectrum.
Inevitable.
But how do we grapple with some of the ethical questions that come up?
And there are going to be a lot of them. I mean, there are. When we have a self-driving car, everybody realizes that they will make decisions. Okay, first of all, the AI is already making decisions. The car will make decisions. If there's a crash, the self-driving car has to decide whether to favor the passenger, the safety of the passenger, over, say, the safety of the pedestrians or other cars. That's an ethical decision. And so we are going to, and there's groups in Google and every car manufacturer wrestling with the ethics of it. But here's the thing, is that we can actually tell those cars, those AIs, what we can program in the ethics if we are clear about our own ethics, but we're not. It turns out that we are very inconsistent, we're very shallow, we're not very logical, and we're not even very aware of it. So the challenge is actually not programming them, it's actually surfacing our own ethics and what they are, because we don't know. We think we're very superior in some senses, but we're actually not. And there's a very good likelihood that the AIs will actually be much more ethical than we are, much more consistent, much more likely to make an emotional error. And so they may actually come to, in the end, to be teaching us how to be better ethically. But at the same time, there's still lots of things that we need to figure out. I'm a little concerned about cyber warfare and the weaponization of AI, and soldiers that taking the kill decision out. These are all things that we really have to decide, and we haven't been. We've kind of not thinking deeply about them. So they're going to come up, and we're going to have to make decisions. We can kind of see it with the drones already. Is it okay? What if the drones are actually autonomous, making decisions? Are we comfortable with that? And so there's going to be I think a big moral challenge for us because we're going to come up to our own limits pretty soon.
So you start the book with this notion of becoming, this idea that in this future state, we're all just going to be in a state of always learning and changing and growing. I'm curious, you've been at this longer than any of us in the room, most likely, 30 plus years of being on the internet and on the web. How has it changed you as a person?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm much more fluid than I was before. I think I'm much more flexible. It's kind of like why I travel. I travel to keep my mind flexible, to really try to practice seeing differently. And I think being on the internet where you're always one click away from something you don't believe you know, it can be it can be really, it helps me become a little bit more adaptable and flexible and open to what's new and what's important and what's maybe true. And I think that constant flux has seeped into me in a way that it didn't before, and so that I am probably a lot more fluid than I was before.
So I want to end on a final question. There's been several from the audience here about what you would say to young people in terms of they're going to be spending all of their life living this, much more than the rest of us. What you would say to them in terms of how to live a full and generous life going forward. And I just wanted to bring in something that you have pinned to the very top of your Twitter stack, which is the following saying: over the long term, the future is decided by optimists.
Yeah. So I think optimism is something you can cultivate, and I think people behave better when they're optimistic for the long term. I think it's impossible to take a long-term view without being optimistic. I think that we're at the level of challenges in the world where we need both a global perspective and a long-term perspective, not thinking about the next quarter, the next year, but maybe a generational view that some of the things we want done may take generations to do, so we should start on it, and we may not complete it in our lifetime, but that's the long-term perspective. And I think to do that, it's better to be an optimist. And I think that if there's one basic skill I think that would be indispensable to anybody, no matter what you're doing, that's simply learning how to learn. Because we're going to be perpetual newbies. We're going to be, no matter how old we are, I'm a perpetual newbie. I'm a newbie because in 2 years from now, all the stuff I learned for the phone is going to be passé, and we'll need to have VR things, gestures and commands to know. We'll have something else that we have to learn. And so unlearning what you know and relearning and then learning new things is going to be the permanent state. So that skill is, and it's not just learning how to learn, it's actually learning how you learn, because all of us learn differently. And so part of what your assignment when you're young is to figure out, how do I learn the best? Because you're going to be needing that for the rest of your life. And so it's not just learning how to learn in the abstract, it's learning how you learn, which will take a long time to figure out. Most of us are still figuring that out, how we learn best. And that's sort of where we're going to go. So I would say, take the long view, learn how to learn critical thinking skills, but learning how to learn lifelong is probably the major thing.
What an inspiring note to end on.
Yeah.
Many thanks to Kevin Kelly, Senior Maverick of Wired Magazine. And author of The Inevitable, Understanding the 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future. I'm Diego Rodriguez from IDEO, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, is adjourned.
Thank you.